So, Iron Goddess Roasted. It's an oolong tea. Sometimes some of you are used to seeing that as Oolongs, but in Mandarin, in the pinyin, it should be Wulongs. And so that's the session we're on today. We have 3 great oolong teas that we're going to talk about over the next 3 weeks. So we've got Iron Roasted today, Iron Goddess Roasted, I should say. We have Mountain Orchid next week, and then the following week we have White Orchid. So let me get you situated historically, a little bit of history about oolongs so that we know why we made this selection. And by the way, before I actually get on that history, let's talk about preliminaries. So the preliminary is, let's please be sure to keep your cameras off during the session. And that way there won't be distractions and so forth. Very important. That's the first preliminary. The second thing is, by the time you're done with these 3 sessions, you should have enough information to kind of start to get the difference between a Southern Fujian Wulong tea and a Wuyi Mountain Cliff tea. So this is very important. So now let's jump into history. So the history is Wulong tea wasn't in existence until the 1600s. And it first came into existence in northern Fujian province. And roughly, probably right around the turn of the 1600s, but we have direct physical information starting in 1635 in a poem that was written about Wulong tea in the Wuyi Mountains. So that's the birthplace. As time went on, the craft of doing Oolong moved south first. And so by the late 1600s, they were doing Oolong teas in southern Fujian province. And then by sometime in the 1700s, they were doing it in Canton province. So those were the 3 main areas of Oolong tea. By 1852 or so, Taiwan started doing Oolong tea. So each area has different varietals, and actually, although they all are Oolong teas, we've got to understand why they're Oolong teas. They are semi-oxidized. Okay, so let's get ourselves with a complete understanding by category of why this makes a difference. Green teas are unoxidized. Your red/black teas are heavily oxidized. So Oolong sits right in between the greens and the black teas, or the red teas. So is this process easier or harder than, say, a green tea process or a red tea process? It's considerably harder. So remembering in the past when we've done cliff teas, there's up to 30 steps, and it takes about 3 months to complete the total processing for a cliff tea. Now, I mentioned today we're doing Iron Goddess Roasted. Iron Goddess Roasted is in southern Fujian. The process for doing that is much simpler, and it takes much less time. So really think 30 days versus 3 months. That's the first main difference. The second is the terroir. So let's think about the terroir for a minute. In northern Fujian province, what is the terroir like? It's full of mild microclimates, lots of fog. The people there eat more heavily spiced food. Therefore, the output of what they have, plus what they grow, grows in volcanic soil. As you move south into Anxi, which is where this is from, soil is not volcanic. And therefore, the taste profile is going to be very different. So the very first thing to remember about oolongs from a taste perspective is you're not going to get a minerality out of the southern oolong teas. You're not going to get a minerality out of the Taiwan oolongs. You're not going to get a minerality out of the Cantonese, or the Canton, I should say, oolongs. So that's one of the major differences. In terms of the process, I'll break it down simply for you. There's 8 or 9 steps. So everybody goes through the same first step. You got to pick. And then you have to make a decision on how you're going to pick or what you're going to pick. Now, obviously, you're going to pick the tea bush. So I didn't mean it that way. I meant, is it going to be a bud only? Almost nobody does bud only for oolongs. So is it a bud and a leaf? Is it bud and 2 leaves? Is it bud and 3 leaves or more? And what season are you going to pick? Are you going to pick in multiple seasons? This all has an impact on quality. So a bud and a couple leaves, which is what this is, by the way, is during the spring pick of the highest quality. So they have this saying that in terms of Wulong teas, especially southern Wulong teas, you get a couple picks usually, and that would be a spring pick and a fall pick. Occasionally, you have farmers also doing a summer pick. Very rarely, you have farmers doing a winter pick. So let's dismiss summer and winter right away, because those are both bad quality, not good quality. The fall pick is beloved in certain parts of China because the aroma is so potent. The spring pick is loved because it's not sprayed, especially when you get the first picks, the very first picks, it's not really sprayed. It starts to get sprayed as you get later in the picking cycle. So that's the first thing. And the flavor of the spring picks is a very nice flavor. From a tea connoisseur perspective, the spring pick flavor is a favored flavor. The reason we never bring in fall picks is they're always heavily sprayed, very heavily sprayed. They have to be. That late into the season, what happens? You got bugs everywhere. And in order to control that, virtually the only real way to control that is through heavy spraying. All right, so you make a pick decision, then everybody goes through a withering process. A withering is either leaving it outside or a combination of leaving it outside and inside and reducing the moisture content. How much do you want to reduce the moisture content? You want to reduce it usually to around 70%, 60-70% moisture left in the leaf. And farmers know how to do this through this smell of it. It's really interesting because they're not using tools, electronic tools, to determine what is the moisture content. They smell the leaves. They know from experience, oh yeah, this is about 30% of the moisture has been removed, or about 40%, and they also feel the leaves. After that, they go through a rolling process, and in fact, they go through several rolling processes. One is a rolling process after the withering, and what they're trying to do is break down the cells of the leaves themselves to allow oxidation to begin. And once oxidation begins, then flavor profiles and the volatiles from the aroma change. And that's part of the magic of Fujian teas, of the Wulong teas. After that, and I'm telescoping in a way this process because some farmers roll 4 or 5 times, some farmers roll only 2 times. Every farmer has a different recipe. So this is the generalized picture of what happens. After the rolling, then you've got to stop the oxidation at some point. How do you stop the oxidation? You apply heat. And usually the heat is between 300 and 450 degrees. And they usually, but not always, are doing that in a wok. Some of them have tumblers with heat. So either way will work. And these years, there are more of those tumblers that are coming online because you can process more at one time. So that gets you up through that step. So once you apply that heat, then the oxidation enzyme is denatured and the whole process comes to a halt. So you're stabilizing, in essence, what the flavor profile is going to be. At the conclusion of that, you usually let the leaves rest a bit and then you bake them. Why do you bake them? You bake them in order to reduce the moisture content down to the level that they can be stabilized. So what do I mean by stabilized? You want the leaves not to mold after 3 months. So you've got to get that water content down to 5 or 6% or less. If you leave it up there at 10 or 12%, it's going to mold over a period of time, usually after about 3 months. So at the conclusion, then you sort through and make sure that there's no things in there that don't belong in there. So what are the types of things that end up coming in that don't belong? So if you have rocks in there, or if you have insects in there, anything, or twigs from the bushes, anything that doesn't belong is sorted out. It's then allowed to rest for about 30 days, and then it goes to market. Why do you rest it at all? Why don't you just sort it, pack it, put it on the market? You, technically speaking, could do that. But what would happen if you did? A lot of people would get sick because Oolong, when it's just finished, is so potent, and the polyphenols express themselves in such a way that for many people, drinking that makes them nauseated. I've drunk Oolong on the day after it's finished, and I don't get nauseated, but the farmers are always cautious with this, and they warned us, oh, maybe you better not drink that. But they're drinking it, and I'll drink it too. And I was okay, but not everybody is, and that's why they rested for about 30 days. So in short, that's the process of doing, that's the normal process of doing a Southern Oolong tea, Southern Fujian Oolong tea. So what process did we insert? And when I say we, I'm talking about Xiaobei and myself. We asked the farmer to actually roast the leaves directly so that we could get that roasty flavor into the tea liquor itself when it was made.
Question.
Yeah.
Do farmers test water content with measuring devices during the baking component?
So the question is, do farmers who joined the 21st century get those really modern and useful tools that can measure water magically, the modern tools, in order to determine that they've gotten it down to the right level? The answer would be no. Most farmers, the only people who are really using industrial tools are industrial processors. Farmers are not using those tools. They know by aroma and feel what the right content or what the right feel should be in order to, or what right aroma and feel should be in order to satisfy that 5 to 6%. Do they have errors? Occasionally they do. And so therefore, pre-going through customs in China, we always ask someone else to look at and make sure and measure in the same way that Chinese customs will measure that the water content is less than 6%. But by and large, they're all there. Yes.
At what step in the process were these leaves roasted?
At what? This was at the very end, after everything had been finished, and they weren't packed, obviously, but they'd been sorted. And Shelby and I, we thought, you know what? We'd like to have a southern Fujian Wulong that has a roasty flavor. Can you do that? We asked the farmer direct, and he said, well, I've never thought about it, but I'm willing to try. And so the story of how that went was, he said, okay, this is going to take about 6 hours. You guys go wander through the village and come back at the end of 6 hours and we'll test. And so Shelby and I dutifully wandered through the village, talked to as many people as we could, and at the end of 3 hours, we were done. These villages are small. And so we wandered back to the farm and we walked into this guy's production area and we smelt it, and right away, hey, stop right there. That smells really good. So he stopped the process. We tried, as soon as it cooled down enough, we tried the tea itself. Oh my God, this is what we want. And that's how that occurred, because that's not normal for them to go through that process. And again, because we're really good friends with this farmer, he agreed to do that. Now, you know what? It's time for us to go ahead and make this cup of tea. Not you yet. It's time for the tea master to demonstrate, and then we'll roast with you. So, or we'll brew with you. So without further ado, let me bring on the numinous thirsty tea master.
Okay. So today, so we do Oolong tea, huh? This is a long time. Yeah. So Oolong, so I really another. It's my favorite. So most people in China simply another. So consumer ask me, wait, what tea did you like? What terroir tea? What terroir another? Did you like it? I say, depend the category. Okay, so Oolong. Oolong now, so why I like Oolong? So this Oolong from the from the yeah, this is the. So if you like it, so it's another space. I change it. This is the stone. I like it. Earth. So we have a lot of detail here. So watch me up. Okay, make a Oolong tea.
So this is her setup. This tray actually drains water. In a minute, this is a rock setting, but the drain is in the front. There's words carved on this rock setting, which you'll see in a minute as water gets poured out. I'll translate those for you. So remembering that we're going to use 200-degree water. And the words are already illuminated.
This is the simple arms. One with the Oolong in factory in China. I simply so the collective another words looking. So now from here, row 家和万事兴
So may everything go, all things go smoothly and happily for your family. So very nice sentiment, nicely carved on the surface of this. So remember, you heat up your cup, you heat up your vessel, whether you're using a clay pot or a ceramic pot, you need to preheat them. Oolong tea likes heat and it likes lots of it. Remember, we're going to brew at 200 degrees. Oh, and for those of you who have the special pots, I realize I forgot to tell you to make an adjustment in terms of the amount you're using. You should be using 5 grams rather than 6 grams. So after heating the pot, and by the way, if you're using clay, it's going to be a 2-minute steeping. If you're using ceramic, it's going to be a 3-minute steeping. Those who are using the special pots don't exceed 2 minutes. Remember to take out, it should only be 5 grams. So you shake the tea around, you're waking up the tea leaves. 200-degree water. And so there are rules for this, and we go through these rules on purpose because if you follow these rules, you're going to get a very delicious cup of Wulong tea. So she's not in 200-degree water. She pours it into the clay pot. Then we set the timer for 2 minutes. Okay. So I went through with you the steps. I went through the 2 most popular times that tea is picked and processed. That would be spring and fall. This is a spring pick, obviously. I want to talk to you a little bit about the legends surrounding Wulong tea, especially Southern Fujian, particularly this one. This is Iron Goddess Roasted. So Iron Goddess is a deity, Tieguanyin. And what's the story behind this? Now, any good story will have dates and they'll have specific names and all the things that let you know that these stories must be true. So the story around this was that there was a peasant in Sungyang, a specific place in Anxi, and his name was Wuyi. And in 1720, a date, that means it must be true. He went to bed, fell asleep, and had a dream. And in that dream, the goddess Guanyin came to him and said, "Behold," and she led him, in the dream, of course, up a rocky path. And in a crevice was a tea plant. So he wakes up the next morning. He remembers this dream. And like all of us, when we have these really significant dreams, we think to be continued. Timer went off. Not in a hurry. We're getting that tea liquor into the cup, not trying to create bubbles, just trying to get it in there smoothly. Okay. So let's observe a few things. Let's look at the color of this thing. So when you end up brewing it, it should be this color. It's a beautiful, and I would call this a light brownish color with just the barest tinge of amber within the tea liquid. Now, remembering, of course, that we're about to enter the tea quality arena. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at these leaves and smell them. Now, you just brewed this thing at 200 degrees. Well, you haven't brewed yet, but when you do it, it'll be 200 degrees. Remember, if you stick your nose in here, you will be unhappy with me for the next 3 to 4 weeks because this will singe your nasal passage. You don't want that. You want to catch the aroma, but you don't want to singe your passage. So you carefully take a 200-degree smell. And now, remembering also that this is a 200-degree liquid, you're going to take a 200-degree sip. What's the difference between that and, say, a white tea brewed at 170 or 175? Well, a white tea or any tea brewed at 170 or 175, you can actually get enough to coat the tongue safely without burning yourself. This one, this 200-degree sip is more like an inhalation where you take in only a few drops. And what you're trying to do when you take that in is get just barely enough to start to get the mouthfeel. And so what are we looking for? We're looking for level of astringency. We're looking where it occurs in the mouth. We're looking at aftertaste. And then we're going to look for energetics. And by the way, since this is a 200-degree tea, a Wulong, no less, as we drink down the cup, we're going to look for changes. And we're going to make a determination, and we'll fully make that determination next week after we have a cliff tea, because we're going to discover something that's very different about cliff teas than these. So let's go through this step carefully. Like you're watching me go through this step. You haven't heard yet. Okay, so I got a very little bit in. And by the way, why aren't I blowing on this? You know, Americans love to blow on things when they perceive them as too hot. If you blow on it, what happens is the aroma gets away from you. Remember, this is a total experience. That's why you don't blow on it. And instead you inhale and just get a few drops in. Now, I'm green, so I've got to do it again. Okay, so remembering, I'm thinking about mouthfeel. I'm thinking about where this occurs in my mouth. I'm also thinking about aftertaste. What aftertaste is there? Is there a cooling taste? Is there a roasty taste? Is it heavy? Is the liquor thick, dense, thin? What am I experiencing? And then afterwards, interject. All right, it's your turn to brew. So you're going to get your equipment, or your equipment should be ready, either a clay pot or a ceramic. And by the way, why wouldn't you use a glass pot? I mean, after all, a pot is a pot, right? It's got a lid. It can keep some heat in the container. Why not use a glass pot? The reason you don't normally use a glass pot is it dissipates heat too fast. You notice in the ceramic, we're having you brew an extra minute. That's because it dissipates faster than the clay pot. Oolong, because of how it's made, needs that extra heat. All right, Tea Master is making sure that the pot is absolutely clean, no residue. Why do you care if there's residue? What if one leaf from the previous brew just sticks in there. Does it really matter? Now, we've all learned that details do matter, especially when they're aggregated. When they're aggregated, details absolutely matter. And if you brew something the second time, it's going to have a different flavor. And for those who are really connected from a flavor understanding, it will make a difference. And I'm going to talk about it. So you put the leaves in, get a sense of the aroma. And while we're waiting for the 200-degree water to come here, I will talk about this ability to detect micro flavors and micro aromas. The best of the tasters in China can easily do this. Not only can they easily do this, they do this and demonstrate this. All right, by the way, you're putting the 200-degree water in. Fill to the top and you cover. You cannot brew this uncovered. You must cover it. You set the timer if it's clay for 2 minutes, if it's ceramic for 3 minutes. So before I finish up the legend, oh no, let's finish up the legend and then we'll go to the super tasters. So this peasant got up and said, you know, let me see if I can find this path that Guanyin gave me this dream about. And so he does find this path and goes up it, and sure enough, right in the same position as in his dream was this tea plant. He dug it up, brought it home, and cultivated it, and that's the start, according to legend. And there's several legends, but that's one of the more interesting legends. And again, because I gave you all the details, we know that legend is true. All right, so let's talk about super tasters in China. We've had fun with super tasters, and let's talk also in conjunction with that about scientists in China. So I ask you this question. If you are a tea purveyor, and you know the farmer, and you know your market, is the picture complete? The answer is no. If you don't know the scientists who are interacting with farmers, particularly in China, incomplete. Your picture is not complete. Why? Scientists since actually the 60s have been embedding with peasants, learning the process from the most or the best of the farmers, and then sharing information, researching information, and then disseminating information. We'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in a minute. So timer went off. You're going to, not in a hurry, very deliberately, take the tea and separate it from the tea leaves. So again, your should look like this, or roughly something like that. And so let's go, or let's have you go through the quality arena steps. And while you're going through those, I'll come back to the importance of scientists in a second. So the first thing you're going to do, and remember it, 200-degree water, 200-degree pot, intensely hot. You must be careful because there are two very bad things you can do. One is to singe your nasal passage. Very unpleasant, very unpleasant. The second is to actually burn your tongue. even worse. So let's use great care and caution. When you smell the leaves, get it from a distance. Make sure you get some sense of this. Take some notes. By the way, take good notes, because remember, the next 3 sessions, or the next 2 following this one, are going to be about Oolong teas, and we're going to have a real contrast next week, and that's why having good notes this week, you'll be able to point out the contrast right away.
The camera person has a comment.
Ah, yes,
I think it's a really lovely rose gold.
I like
Color.
that. So Kay has mentioned that, and she used really good words. She said, instead of saying brownish with a tinge of amber, that's not very artistic. Use art. Rose gold. I love this comment. It is a rose
It's
gold.
unique.
And it's unique. Yes, among the teas that we have here, you have virtually not seen this color, and certainly not among the oolongs. Great starting point. Yes.
The aroma of the dry leaves reminded me of coffee with a hint of roastiness. The wet leaves were more pronounced roastiness with some vegetal smells. It was mouth-watering, making me excited to taste the tea liquor.
The dry leaves reminded this commentator a little bit of coffee. They detected, was it in the roasted leaf, the wet leaves that they detected that roast? Was it?
Yes,
Yeah,
in-
okay, the wet leaves, you definitely got that roast, and then it created a mouth-watering sensation, wanting the commentator wanting to go ahead and have this experience. So before I get to the next comment, I really want to say something about this comment, because you have unintentionally seen behind the veil. And so when Xiaobei and I asked the farmer to further roast this, we were thinking of 2 things. One thing is, there are a lot of coffee drinkers in America. Maybe something that brings out a little bit more of a roasty flavor might be attractive. So that was one thing. The second thing we were thinking of was, hey, Americans like gunmai cha. That's the Japanese gunmai cha, the toasted rice or barley tea. And what if we directly apply the roast to the leaves? Will we get something that is reminiscent, not exactly the same, but reminiscent of that? So this commentator stumbled upon me. Good catch. Yes.
Is there a reason the leaves are balled up as compared to relatively straight in the case of most clip teas? Is this functional or just aesthetic?
So this is a great question, because it points out that I haven't made a correct presentation, because the questioner asks, why are the leaves in a ball? And then asks further, is this typical of other cliff teas? The other cliff teas is where I haven't made it clear. This is not a cliff tea. This is a southern Fujian tea, which is, that's about 150 or 200 miles away from where the cliff teas are. And this is a completely different style. And you also hit upon a stylistic consideration. They, in this area, decided in the 90s, actually, that they liked the sense of having a rolled up ball leaf. And so, was this decided by some tea god or somebody coming through and saying, oh, it should be this way? No, this was an aesthetic that actually the Taiwanese who drink light Wulong teas, they also like this rolled up, and they came upon that later as well, although not as late as the Chinese did. And so strictly stylistic, pre-1990s, this tea, the Iron Goddess, used to be in strip form.
The warm pre-steeped leaves had a mix of chocolate, raisin, and rose scent.
chocolate, raisin, and roast in the warmed pre-steeped leaves. Love this comment because again, you're getting that sense that there's a lot in the initial going on with this. And this is why you always heat the leaves, because you want them to wake up, but you also want to get that first impression. Yes.
The hot leaves have a strong charcoal and mineral aroma, and as they cool, the smell gets sweeter.
So the wet leaves, strong charcoal, mineral aroma, and they get sweeter. It gets sweeter as it cools. Now, I'm really glad you made that comment, and I want you to, again, take good notes, because next week, when we try a cliff tea, we're going to come back to that sense of minerality and talk about that as a contrast to what you're referring to here, this minerality. Good comment.
The tea liquor has a scent of roasty caramel.
Tea liquor has a scent of roasted caramel. Love this comment because that is the sweetness. There's an inherent slight sweetness in this tea. And when you first are drinking this, because it's so hot, sometimes the nature of what this tea is hard to detect. But as it cools, more and more is exposed, and you're able to detect more and more of the essence of the tea.
On the wet leaves, I also detect aroma of warm yeasted dough, roasted dark chocolate, hints of sweetness of dried fruits.
Warm yeast dough, hints of chocolate, sweetness of dried fruits, and that's on the warm leaves. And I love this comment. I really love this comment a lot because the warm yeasted smell is a real, it's a good characterization of what's occurring in the wet leaves. It's a very good, in terms of the aroma profile.
And the first sip gave me a hint of sweetness. Overall mellow, juicy, lightly astringent, smooth on the tongue.
Hint of sweetness in the first sip, juicy, mellow, and hint of what?
Let's see.
At the very end.
Oh, smooth on the tongue.
And smooth on the tongue. Love this comment because, you know, sometimes people confuse heat with, they don't always step back and carefully evaluate. But this commentator did, because they mentioned juicy and smooth. And sometimes people need to wait until it's a little cooler to detect that smoothness, but you detected it right away. And that's because you're taking those inhalations. Good catch on this.
She also said lightly astringent.
Lightly astringent, yes. This one is not heavily astringent. It's a long-lasting lightly astringent, but it's not heavily astringent. Correct.
Infused leaves unrolled from balled up shape, and it looks shiny. Unlike wet leaves, infused leaves give off vegetal aroma and spiciness.
Love this comment. So the leaves, this talks and addresses an important aesthetic of this. And whether it's roasted or not roasted, the leaves have almost a glistening type of approach, not approach, but an appearance after you brewed them. And in addition to that, the what was the last part of that comment?
The infused leaves give off a vegetal aroma and
vegetal.
spiciness.
Yeah, vegetal aroma and spiciness. I like this because at the end of the day, this is an agricultural product. It's a leaf, and you can never escape at some level that leafiness or vegetalness. In some cases, it's grassiness, but not this one. The vegetal, I think, is a better descriptor. And it's good because while it gives off all of these flavors, the tea liquor does, because you use a heated enough top to really unlock those volatiles that were on the leaf. That's really a good catch with this. Yes.
That's
Okay. All right. So prior to getting into these comments, we were talking about scientists and why, as a tea purveyor, you don't really know Chinese teas until you get to know Chinese scientists, because they've seen and these are agricultural scientists, by the way. You don't have to know Chinese physics. You need to know an agricultural scientist. These scientists have seen so much and experimented so much at the research institutes. They've gone to all of these villages. And this came up because we were talking about ability to sense disturbances in taste profiles and aroma profiles. And the best of these scientists would just simply flabbergast you. So Xiaobei and I, this was back in the early years, probably almost 20 years ago. We went to one of these research institutes, and a scientist we'd come to know over the years, we thought, hey, let's test these guys. And so we picked up some tea from a village, didn't tell him where the village was. We felt proud of our find. And they made it up. In other words, they made the tea. He tried it. And so then he starts to go through his monologue. Okay, this is non-Shi. Good. This is from this village. Oh my God. And the village he named was a mile away from where this farm was. And then he goes through the descriptors of the flavor profile. And then he rated it compared to all like types of the same tea. And he ended it with unadulterated. And both Xiaobei and I were flabbergasted because he nailed it. He absolutely nailed it. Now, you notice that in that last comment, it seemed like I just used a big word carelessly. I said unadulterated. Why did I say that? It wasn't careless. So what is the number one problem in southern Fujian, especially related to Iron Goddess from Anxi? And let's get you situated a little bit more carefully. So Iron Goddess from Anxi, from Xiping Anxi, that's a mountain location within Anxi. That is some of the most famous because of that orchidness of the floralness and the long-lasting taste. I mean, it's absolutely out of this world. Good. Oh, and by the way, did I forget to tell you? On the list of the top 10 teas in China, and we know in some way that's a somewhat arbitrary list, but if you're on that list, it's a great tea. And this tea is on that list. Iron Goddess is on that list. So what does that mean about LCSs? Okay, so when the LCSs are evaluated, where am I going to make the most money? Oh, I got to go to that list of the 10 famous teas and see if somehow I can make extra profit on those. And sure enough, on the Anxi teas, Iron Goddess, over the years, there have been these liars, cheaters, and scammers. That's the LCS I'm referring to, who've taken that varietal and then mixed it with other varietals and then put it on the market as if this is Iron Goddess. And so the ability of scientists to be able to taste right away, yep, unadulterated, That's very important. Yes.
Tea liquor greeted me with roasty and fresh vegetal aroma, and it wakes up my senses for sure.
Roasty, fresh aroma that wakes up this commentator's senses. Great opening comment. Yes.
This tea seems more delicate than other Wulongs. Minerality and roast are working together, neither overwhelming the other. Very impressed. J and X's noses knew when to stop the roast.
I appreciate the compliment. This commentator makes a very important point, talking about the delicacy of this tea. Now, most unsophisticated tea drinkers would not know to use that D word, delicate. This is delicate. And the fact that this commentator picked that up means that this is an experienced tea drinker. And in China, they would absolutely call this delicate. And so the commentator further comments on a blend, a nice blend of mineral and roastiness, and that we stopped the roast at just the right point.
The flavor is roasty, but has notes of deep raisin, a bit drying on the center of my tongue, and yet coats my tongue.
So drying coats the tongue, deep hints of raisin and a little spicy. Did I miss anything?
No.
Okay. Is what this
And
commentator
coats the tongue.
coats the tongue. Absolutely. So this isn't what we would call super viscous, but it isn't light either. It's not dense. And all of you are kind of dancing around this. Delicate, there's a coating, but it's not, intense. This is what this tea is about. It really is a very high quality tea that through your interaction with mouthfeel, you get to that point fairly quickly.
A very lovely tea, agree more delicate than others I've had. It seems to become thicker as gets down in the cup.
A lovely tea which seems to get thicker as this commentator gets down the cup. Love this comment. And I want to focus on the last part of it. Seems to get thicker as the commentator goes down the cup. Why are we focusing on that? Again, next week when we do a cliff tea, we're going to talk about stages of drinking throughout the cup. You are making already a discussion here of stages of drinking through the cup. Why? In the beginning, it's so hot that it is really hard to take very much volume in your mouth to control or to have a full understanding. But as it cools, you get a deeper and deeper understanding. Now, is it the fact that the tea is changing, or is it the fact that it's cooling? In this case, it's more about cooling. In cliff tea case, it seems to be more about actual changing. And again, you'll experience some of that next week. And then you come to your own conclusions. And let's talk about those next week, because this one, from our perspective, is really, really consistent from top to bottom. Yes, you get deeper hints or different emphasis of the hints as you go through the tea itself, but there aren't that many unusual surprises that occur.
Wish I had more time to enjoy a second cup. This tea is telling me to sit in a quiet place and slowly enjoy the flavors, colors, and aromas.
So this person wishes they had more time to enjoy a second cup, because this tea is signaling that they need to take the time to enjoy, which they are, the flavors, the colors, the aromas. Great comment.
Yes, got the viscosity and dry middle of the tongue also.
Viscosity and dryness in the middle of the tongue. Good comment.
I think it's, the mouthfeel is really profound in this tea,
Profound in what way?
more than other teas. It just keeps coming back to among some, the tasting and the aromas, and the mouthfeel kind of becomes secondary. This, I feel like I'm experiencing
Great comment.
the mouthfeel continually.
So Kay focuses on, for her, the mouthfeel is is continuously the highlight throughout drinking this tea. And that's a really interesting point. And again, something to save in our thinking as we go through the other Wulong teas, because yes, some teas, it is more about a continuous mouthfeel. Some teas, it is not. Some teas, there are highlights that come through the mouthfeel, and mouthfeel becomes secondary. Love that comment.
Is there a second and or third steeping?
There's a second steeping only. So the second steeping is as follows. For the clay pots, it's 1 minute. For the ceramic pots, it's 2 minutes. All right. Yeah, okay. All right. So let's see how I'm doing. Oh, I'm doing okay. There's a few other things I want to see if I can cover relatively quickly. Loved going through this tea and loved your commentary. You really grokked this tea quite early and quite correctly. Hope you've taken good notes, because again, we have a nice tea next week called Mountain Orchid. The other thing you should have taken away from today is this discussion about scientists and getting your teas. If the tea purveyors aren't working with scientists and don't understand the role that scientists are playing, you're not going to be able to get the best of the teas. Scientists are intimately involved, along with farmers, in getting the best of the teas. It isn't just going to the farmers. You need to be doing both. So that's something hopefully you take away from today. The third thing, which we didn't want to talk about, which we didn't talk about, actually there's 2 more things. Let me get to a really important thing so I don't forget it, and then we'll get to the other item I'm going to talk about. One of our team members went through open heart surgery this week, and that's Scott Wentworth. I'm happy to report that it was successful, and that even though there was a little blip during the middle of the week, he's up and starting to walk, with the hope that potentially by Monday, maybe even tomorrow, he can be released. So want to send along our prayers and good wishes. He's been an important member of the tea family for years, and just wishing him the best of recoveries. All right, the other thing I want to talk about very briefly, and then we'll be done, is herbs, Chinese herbs. Why am I talking about this? This is supposed to be a tea class. We're not supposed to be wandering all over the place. I'm not exactly wandering all over the place. Herbs are a plant, right? And part of what I want to bring up, and we're going to talk about this throughout the Wulong, not the herbs, but the fact that plants are changing because weather patterns are changing, the soil is degrading in some places, and stuff that's coming to market is not as potent as it used to be. We've experienced the same thing, by the way, in the US, because certain grains which used to have selenium and a lot of it, which is very important apparently as an anti-cancer mineral, have very little left. And that's a degradation of the soils. Same issue in China. Areas are degrading areas are getting polluted. And so in general, when you think of plants, including tea plants, so again, why are we looking at the ancient forest? Why are we looking at old forest? Because we're getting stuff, or we're attempting to get stuff that has more of the original nutritive value. Herbals, in some cases, are on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being what the original potency was. They're coming up a 3 or 4. And unless you go back to the original areas. So again, why do we know stuff like this? Basically because we were actually thinking of also going that route and starting to bring in herbals. That's no longer part of our thinking, especially since the pandemic started. But we'd already started doing research on this, and it does affect tea plants. And that's, again, why you have to really be connected with scientists, because scientists know this stuff and are thinking about it and thinking about long-term effects. So I think we'll wrap up there.
But
Yes.
one more. For this tea, would it be good pre-meal, or what do you think of food pairings?
Oh, with food pairings, and should you drink it prior to meal? For me, I like this actually after meal. It's nice and settling on the digestive system. And specifically, when you go through an extra roast, that seems to be pretty good for the digestion. This is, if you're going to serve it with a meal, then the meal should probably not have meat in it, and it should probably be something like a brunch meal with toast and eggs. This would be perfect with that. Probably not so good with a heavier meat-based meal. It would disturb the delicateness. You all actually captured in many great words the essence of this, and you use that word delicate, and it absolutely is. All right. As usual, great commentary on your part. Cannot wait until next week. And there is one thing that the tea master said during the course of actually brewing. And so let me clarify that a little bit, because she said that Wulongs are our favorites. Now, remembering, of course, we love all our children. Yes, we have special places in our hearts. So what she really meant to say, our Wulongs are one of our favorites. With that in mind, you have a good week. We'll see you next Saturday. You take care.